In this video, we're going to show you how to cut an internal thread, a bit like in this example here, where we've got a brass rod with a thread on it, and we've got a bit of sheet steel that's been powder coated in plastic with an internal thread in there as well, allowing two components to then attach together like so. To start this, we are going to use our steel plate that's here. I've already marked out my markings as per the working drawing to go along with this. And before we go any further, I've went in and taken a centre punch and aligned my centre punch with the mark that I wanted to drill. And I've taken that and I've gone in and given that a wee tap there. That's going to allow us to help drill the hole before we go in to put an external thread in. Now this bit's really important. The particular thread we're going to put in here is an M8 thread. Okay, so that's an 8mm thread on there. To do that, we need to drill a hole that is smaller than an M8 thread. So we are going to take a 7.5 drill bit here. We're going to place it into the pillar drill and then drill a hole through this section in preparation for putting the thread in. Now that I've been in and used a centre punch on my sheet metal, I'm now able to go into the pillar drill and start to drill this hole in. So I've now got the pillar drill set up with the machine vise in place and my sheet metal sheet of steel sitting in the machine vise. I've got a piece of scrap wood underneath there so I don't go through and damage the machine vise itself, keeps that intact. I've got the 7.5mm drill bit located into the drill, into the chuck key, all set to go. Before I start drilling, I want to make sure that the drill drill speed is set to 1, so it's a bit slower for cutting through metal, particularly when it's steel. I'm also going to take a wee bit of cutting fluid because we are drilling in metal. I'm just going to put a wee drop there on the area I'm going to be drilling, and you can even take a little bit and just apply it to the bottom of the drill bit there. Okay, and that's going to help lubricate a few things as we start cutting. I'm now going to line up the drill bit with my centre punch mark onto the steel. Once that's in place and lined up, I'm then going to close the guard over, turn the machine on, and I'm slowly going to start drilling down through the steel. I'm going to do it a little bit at a time, going nice and easy, nice and slowly as we cut through. Because the steel is quite hard, I'm going to stop about there as I'm making a restart into this. I'm then going to go in and apply a bit more cutting compound, cutting fluids into the little hole that started to form from the drill bit coming through. And then from there, I'm going to go back in and start drilling a bit further down. I'm just slowly going through, I'm feeling the machine, making sure I'm not giving it too much work, and I'm slowly pulling the handle down until we go through the steel, and that's me there to feel them through to the wood underneath. Bring the drill bit back up, turn the machine off. And the steel might be quite hot at this stage, so be very careful of that when you take it back out the machine vise. And there is also lots of sharp swarf that's been left around there. Please try not to touch that. You can wipe it off with a brush or take it out and just get a wee dent on the side, cleaned up for later. Okay, so there we have our 7.5mm hole ready in preparation for our M8 thread to go through this. Now we've drilled our hole ready for our M8 thread using a 7.5mm drill bit. We are now going to get ready for the tapping process to put an internal thread into this. So the things you're going to need for this are the following. You're going to need to get a tap wrench or tap handle holder. We are then going to get ourselves a taper tap. And if we look at this one here, we can see why it's called a taper, because as we go down to the bottom of the tap here, you can see it tapers away to nothing, and that helps the thread start and get your starting process into there. So we've got our taper tap. We need to get ourselves an intermediate tap, which looks a bit like this one here. You can see how it differs slightly to the taper tap. It's still got a tiny taper at the end there, but not as much. It fleshes out and gets a bit wider, quicker, further up the tap there. And then our third tap that we need is called a plug tap. Now in this scenario where it is a thread that's going straight through a piece of metal, it's not as necessary. However, if you're doing something called a blind hole, where you're going to be threading into a piece of metal that doesn't have it has a bottom, it doesn't go all the way through the metal, you'll need to use the plug tap to finish off that thread. The thread in the plug tap goes right to the bottom, nice and wide and spread out, allowing the thread to get made and created right to the very bottom of the hole that you've drilled. Okay, so in our scenario here, it's not quite as important to use this one at the very end. However, we will use it for good practice for remembering the 3 of them. So we've got there our tap wrench, we've got ourselves a taper tap, we've got an intermediate tap, and then we've got ourselves a plug tap all there. The last thing we need before we start to thread this internal thread is a little bit of cutting compound. Now we've got a wee bit here. We're going to take that and a wee bit of paper towel ready to then scoop a little bit out there and place it onto our first tap. So you'll need all of this before we start. Now that we've got all our tools ready, we're now ready to go in and cut that internal thread into here. So we'll start off with our taper tap to begin with. We're going to take our tap wrench here. We're going to adjust this little thumb screw there to allow the top of the tap to slot into here. So I need to open that a wee bit further there to allow that to slot in. Okay, and once that's slotted in, we'll just tighten it up a little bit there, like so. From this point, we're going to take a bit of paper towel. We're going to take a little bit of cutting compound from the tub here. And I'm just going to apply a little bit onto this tap. Okay, and just a little bit in there. And that's going to help the cutting of the thread here. Particularly because this is steel, it will be a bit trickier to cut compared to something like brass or copper, which is a bit more malleable, a bit easier to cut threads. And this is a bit tougher, a bit more durable, harder steel, so it will be a bit trickier to go in. But this is what the cutting compound is for, is to help us do that process. So we are then going to take the tap and the tap wrench, and we're going to lay it into the hole like so. I'm now just going to move the camera around so we can see that a wee bit clearer from this angle. So we're going to take the tap and we're going to place it into the hole like so. We are looking for that to be nice and vertical. We want it to be perpendicular to this side at 90 degrees. You can take yourself a wee engineering square to make sure you have got that sitting in just right before you start. And once you've checked all of that, we are then ready to go. It's really important that we do start off this first bit nice and straight, perpendicular to that edge, with a wee 90 degrees at the bottom there. If you don't do that and don't take time to do this, you may end up with something called a drunken thread, and you're going to have a bit of a wonky screw in there, and it's not going to be very good. So, to start off with, we're going to place all of our pressure down onto the tap wrench and then through into the tap. We're then going to jump up on our wee tiptoes, and then we're just going to slowly bring the tap around, applying pressure to it as we do so until we get a start into that thread. Being very careful as we do so to try and keep the tap as vertical as possible. We don't want to get a drunken thread in this. We want to keep it nice and straight. Once you've been around one turn, you should start to feel the tap biting into the steel, and it's starting to get that thread. It's beginning to go into there, okay? Once you've got a wee start and you can feel the tap starting to bite, we can then stop. We can reassess. We can go back down and check the tap. We can have a look and double check that it's still sitting square to the metal at 90 degrees. We can go in with our engineering square here just to double check that. And I'm quite happy at that. Okay, I'm happy that that's still sitting quite level and I've not got the start of a drunken thread there. So now that I'm happy, I'm going to go back in. If you notice at this stage that your thread's going a little bit wonky, you can slightly readjust things a little bit with the tap wrench and give it a wee bit of a knock left or right with your hand to get that just right before you go any further. Now that we're ready to go, we're going to continue with that thread there. We're going to turn around one full turn, then back half a turn. Then again, we're going to go around one full turn, back half a turn. Every time I go back half a turn, I'm clearing any excess material in there that's coming out of the thread. And that's clearing the tap, allowing the tap to go a bit further, and it's getting rid of all of that extra swarf that's developing. So I'm going round one full turn, back half a turn. Back in, one full turn, back half a turn. Once that's done, and you're getting down to the bottom of your tap, you can then start to remove the taper tap, and you should see that the thread freely moves out of there. And then we're just going to remove that out there, like so. So we've got the start of a thread beginning in here. Now it's not a fully formed thread yet because we've only been in with the taper tap. We're now ready to go in with the intermediate one. So I'm just going to take that out of the tap wrench and get ready to change over to the intermediate tap now. So as I've just finished with the taper tap, I'm just going to give it a wee clean down now as well. Make sure to get all of that cutting compound out of there, any swarf that's been built up in it from the steel, cutting that thread in there. and that just gets it ready for the next person for when they go in to do their next thread. So I'm going to put that back away now. We can block away the taper tap there. We're now going to come in with the intermediate tap, and as I said earlier on, this one has got a bit of a taper onto it, but not as much as the taper tap. So it's a wee bit wider, a wee bit chunkier, and that's going to cut a bit more of that thread out and make it become a bit of a more stable thread there. So I'm going to take my tap wrench here. I'm going to pop the tap into the tap wrench, tighten it back up there with that wee thumb screw. That's looking fine. And then all I'm going to do again is take some more of that cutting compound from my wee tub here. So grab a bit of paper, jar up. Let's take a wee bit of that onto there. And I'm just going to apply a little bit onto this. Doesn't need to be too much, just a little bit to help it thread in. Now, because we've been in there with the taper tap at the start, there should be the start of a thread in there. So there's something already begun. So I'm going to gently allow the tap to go into there, and I'm just going to try and feel for that thread, okay? So it should already be existing in some capacity. I'm just wanting to try and make sure I'm catching the same thread that it was in previously. And I'm just rotating that in there, like so. I think that is it now into the thread. I'm just going to go down and I'm just going to check again that the thread, the tap and the steel are sitting at 90 degrees in there, perpendicular. So I'm quite happy with that. It looks by eye pretty good. Got my engineering square there, looking good. So I'm quite happy to now power on and continue to create that thread. So we're back in there now, and we're going to go back in, same process before. We're going to go around, do a full turn, back half turn. And we're going to go in, do a full turn, back half turn, in, full turn, back half a turn, full turn, back half a turn, and so on. And that's actually moving really quite freely already. So that's me almost at the bottom of the tap. You can see how freely that's moving in the thread. I'm going to bring that one back out now. Okay. So because this thread actually goes right through the steel, you don't necessarily have to go in and use the plug tap next, but I am going to do that just to show you the process of that. Because the plug tap is for a blind hole where it's going into material and doesn't go all the way through, but we're going to show you that anyways. So I'm now going to clean off the intermediate tap there. Just get any of that cutting compound off of there, get any of the excess out of the way. Again, ready for the next person to come in. Okay. I'm now going to pop that away, back in its wee box, and move over to the plug tap. And we can see there on this one how it winds up right to the bottom, and this is going to give you a full cut of the thread in there and finish off the threading of the steel. Again, this is more for when you're using it in a blind hole where the hole goes into the bottom of a piece of metal, not all the way through. In this scenario, we don't have a thread that sits right in the bottom of the hole because as it's going right through the full thing, so it's not too much of an issue. Again, a wee bit of cutting compound on there, and then in we go. This should locate in quite easily. That's looking fine. So I'm just going to go in there with that and go and clean this out. So that's actually, I can feel it at the start there. It cleaned out a wee bit extra that the intermediate didn't quite do there. But once it's got past that, I can already feel that it's moving really quite freely in there. Okay, so I'm not going to go any further because you can see that sitting and spinning quite nicely. All right. So now what we have is a fully formed internal thread on our sheet steel going through this here. So once you've got that in place and you've cleaned up the taps, cleaned up any excess that's sitting on the steel, you can then get things put away and move on to your external thread on the rod that's going to go into there. And that is how we go about cutting an internal thread on a piece of sheet steel.